The news broke before dawn. The world was still asleep when the first whispers began to ripple through the fog of morning radio chatter. A shadow had fallen over the royal household. Silent, heavy, undeniable. "He won't make it," someone murmured, and though the words were never meant for the public, they carried like an echo through every corridor of Buckingham Palace. What if the man destined to be king, the steady heart of the modern monarchy, never reached the throne? What if the royal family was now facing the one truth it feared most, the loss of its future? Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Every story has a moment when everything changes. For the House of Windsor, it came with a phone call in the dead of night. At first, the palace denied everything. There was no statement, no flag at half-mast, no trembling voice on national television. But behind the gilded gates, lights burned long after midnight. Doctors were escorted through private corridors. Security was tightened. Courtiers whispered in code. The king's private secretary was seen leaving Windsor Castle with red eyes. And somewhere inside those walls, Catherine, Princess of Wales, sat alone at her husband's bedside, holding a trembling hand that had once waved confidently to millions. Something had gone terribly wrong. Prince William, the golden heir, the symbol of hope, was suddenly frail. For years, he'd been the strong one, the image of duty, the face of reassurance. While others around him faltered, he stood firm, always calm, always composed. Yet even he had limits. He'd smiled through endless rumors, faced heartbreak in silence, and carried the impossible weight of public expectation. But now, that same strength was beginning to crack, and those closest to him knew it. People forget that beneath the crown lies a man, a father, a husband, a son. They forget the late-night hospital visits, the private struggles, the sleepless nights spent wondering how to balance a nation's faith with a family's pain. For Prince William, those nights had been getting longer. Catherine had noticed the signs first. A missed breakfast, a faint pallor during an event, the moments when his voice faltered mid-speech, just long enough for her to glance over and know something wasn't right. But William, ever the soldier, dismissed it as fatigue, stress, exhaustion. "I'm fine, Kate," he'd said again and again, until the day he wasn't. There's something haunting about watching a loved one fade while the world keeps smiling at their photograph. Royal watchers began speculating when William canceled 2 major appearances without explanation. Tabloids assumed it was family tension, another feud with Prince Harry, or perhaps issues surrounding the king's health. But insiders whispered something different. Medical teams were being brought in privately. Doctors, specialists, silence. That was the real story. The public saw a poised, polished image, the heir to the throne smiling beside Catherine, greeting the crowds. But those who looked closer noticed it. The subtle changes, the slighter frame, the weariness in his eyes. And then came the photograph. A single image that sparked a storm. William stepping out of a private London clinic, pale and distant, escorted by his personal security. The picture vanished within hours, pulled down by legal injunctions and palace pressure. But by then, it had already gone viral. "Is Prince William sick?" trended worldwide. Within the palace, the truth was far more complicated. What began as mild exhaustion soon became a matter of grave concern, a diagnosis that no amount of royal privilege could shield him from. The doctors urged discretion, but Catherine couldn't hide her worry. Imagine the weight of knowing your husband, the future king, was fighting something that couldn't be fixed by titles, doctors, or destiny. She tried to stay strong for their children. George's laughter still filled the hallways. Charlotte's piano practice echoed through Kensington Palace, and little Louis chased after the corgis as if nothing had changed. But behind every smile was fear. It's one thing to face tragedy as a person. It's another to face it under the blinding light of the monarchy. As William's condition worsened, royal life became a performance. Appearances were carefully timed to coincide with good days. Public engagements were trimmed. The press was fed optimistic lines about temporary health challenges. But in reality, the royal doctors had begun holding daily consultations. And then, without warning, Buckingham Palace issued an emergency statement. It wasn't the typical polished royal announcement. It was short, emotionless. His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, will be reducing his public duties under medical advice. That was it. No details, no reassurance. Just those few words. The nation froze. What kind of medical advice? Why now? What was being hidden? Inside the palace, King Charles's private meeting ran into the early hours. His closest advisors urged transparency, but the king hesitated. He had lost his mother not long ago. Now he faced losing his son. How do you prepare a father to say goodbye to his firstborn, the man meant to carry his legacy? The atmosphere within the royal family was unlike anything seen since the death of Princess Diana. It was as if history was repeating itself, another chapter of grief unfolding before the world's eyes. Even senior royals were visibly shaken. Queen Camilla canceled 2 scheduled visits without explanation. Princess and refused interviews. Prince Edward was seen leaving Windsor with tears in his eyes. Yet through it all, Catherine remained the silent pillar. Her strength became the family's anchor, though behind closed doors, even she was breaking. She refused to let the children see her cry. Every bedtime story was told with a trembling voice but a steady smile. Every morning, she stood beside William, adjusting his tie, helping him mask the pain. But the truth couldn't stay hidden forever. The world was about to learn what the family already knew, that the heir to the British throne was fighting for his life. There was one evening in particular, one that Catherine never forgot. It was raining heavily outside Kensington Palace, the kind of relentless London rain that seemed to echo her heartbeat. William had just returned from a private appointment. His face was pale, his movements slow. She asked him what the doctors had said. He looked at her for a long time before answering. "Kate," he whispered, "I don't have long." Those words shattered her. Not because she hadn't feared them, but because he said them without fear. Even then, his concern was for her, for the children, for the country. "Promise me," he said softly, "you'll tell them I tried." And that's when she realized, this wasn't just about illness. This was about legacy. In public, William carried on as if nothing had changed. He shook hands, smiled, waved. The cameras loved him, the people adored him. Yet behind every photograph was a countdown he never spoke of. The royal staff began preparing for contingencies. Quiet meetings were held in the lower levels of Clarence House. Drafts of potential succession protocols were reviewed. Lawyers updated wills. Something enormous was being set in motion. And yet, no one dared to speak the words aloud. What would Britain look like without William? Could the monarchy survive another heartbreak? Would the people still believe in a crown that kept losing its soul? As rumors swirled, palace insiders tried to contain the leak, but truth has a way of finding light. One journalist, an old royal correspondent who had covered Diana's story, received an anonymous envelope. Inside was a single line typed on royal stationery: "He won't make it." The story was about to break. By morning, every major network was on standby. Reporters camped outside Windsor Castle. Crowds gathered at the palace gates, holding candles, flowers, and flags. The same gates that once celebrated weddings now stood as barriers to heartbreak. But inside those gates, Catherine sat beside her husband, holding his hand, listening to the faint ticking of the clock, each tick louder than the last. He was still fighting, still smiling, still pretending to be strong for her. And then, just as dawn began to break, she looked into his eyes and saw something she had never seen before: acceptance. It wasn't surrender. It was peace. He had made his choice. That morning, a royal aide was sent to deliver an envelope to King Charles. Inside was William's sealed medical file and a handwritten note. When the king read it, his hands trembled. He said nothing, but those present swore they saw him whisper a single phrase under his breath: "Not again." Within hours, the entire royal household went silent. Meetings were canceled, phones confiscated, and every television in the palace switched to black screen. The diagnosis had changed everything. No press release could contain it. No denial could undo it. And while the nation waited for answers, a single question hung in the air like smoke. How long had they known? Because this wasn't sudden. It wasn't random. There had been signs, coded remarks, subtle shifts in power. Even William's recent speech about cherishing every moment of life now sounded hauntingly final. But what exactly had the doctors told him? What kind of illness could bring a man like Prince William to his knees? That's where the story takes a darker turn, one that the palace tried desperately to hide. Because what Catherine found next, tucked away in his private study, didn't just reveal the truth about his condition. It revealed the secret that would shake the entire monarchy to its foundation. And once she opened that letter, there was no turning back. It started with silence. Heavy, unnatural, suffocating silence. Not the kind that fills a quiet morning, but the kind that falls over a place that's used to constant movement, constant noise. Buckingham Palace, the beating heart of royal tradition, had gone still. Phone stopped ringing. The usual rhythm of footsteps in the marble corridors slowed to nothing. And when the clock struck 9, not a single aide, secretary, or guard dared to breathe too loudly. Something had happened. Something they weren't ready to speak about. Do you remember where you were when you first heard the news? Most people don't forget moments like these. For decades, the royal family had been the backbone of British stability, weathering scandal, tragedy, and change. But this was different. This time, the storm wasn't external. It was coming from within. The palace press office, usually buzzing by dawn, remained dark. The flag above the gates fluttered against a gray London sky. Crowds began to gather without even knowing why. They could sense it. Something terrible had occurred behind those ancient walls. Inside, the air was thick with dread. Catherine paced quietly through the private wing, her heels clicking softly against polished wood. Her hands were clasped tight, knuckles pale. Every few seconds, she glanced toward the closed door at the end of the hall, the one guarded by 2 silent men in dark suits. Behind that door lay the future of the monarchy. Prince William, pale, weak, and fading faster than anyone had expected. The night before had been chaos. A sudden collapse, a call to the palace physician, then the rush of security vehicles through the gates, lights flashing, as doctors were summoned under strict confidentiality. No alarms were raised to the public. No emergency broadcast interrupted the evening news. Everything was handled quietly, efficiently, and with the same rigid discipline that defined royal life. But there was one thing they couldn't control: fear. King Charles had been woken at 2 a.m. The call came from Catherine herself, her voice breaking as she said the words no parent should ever hear. He's not breathing properly. The king arrived an hour later. No cameras followed him. No official record of his journey exists. But witnesses along the back roads leading to Windsor reported seeing a black Bentley speeding through the fog, escorted by 2 Range Rovers. By dawn, the palace was on lockdown. Every staff member was told to hand in their phones. Journalists waiting outside were told nothing. Even senior aides were kept in the dark. Only a handful of people knew the truth, and every one of them carried it like a ghost. Inside William's room, the doctors moved quickly. Machines beeped softly in the background, monitors casting pale light across the walls. Catherine sat beside him, her eyes red from hours of crying, her hand resting on his. Every so often, his fingers twitched, proof that he was still fighting, still there. And yet, deep down, she could feel it slipping away. The heir to the throne, the man the world had watched grow from boy to prince to leader, now confined to a hospital bed, surrounded by whispers of inevitability. No one dared to say it aloud. Not yet. But everyone felt the same unspoken truth. Prince William might not make it through the day. And just like that, the palace, the institution that had survived centuries, was paralyzed by a single man's heartbeat. Meanwhile, across the city, news networks began to pick up on unusual activity. BBC producers received anonymous tips that the Royal Communications Office was preparing a blackout notice. Sky News helicopters hovered cautiously near Windsor, waiting for confirmation of what everyone suspected, but no one could verify. But the real story wasn't unfolding in front of cameras. It was happening in whispered exchanges, trembling hands, and tearful glances. Catherine refused to leave his side. She spoke to him softly, recounting little moments from their life together, their first royal tour, the day George was born, the nights they'd spent laughing over family dinners. She told him he was loved, that the country needed him, that the children would always remember him as strong. Sometimes, she thought she saw a flicker of recognition in his eyes. Sometimes, he squeezed her hand back. Outside the door, King Charles stood silently. The same man who had always seemed unshakable, stoic, composed, born for the weight of the crown, was trembling. His private secretary approached, holding the latest report from the physicians. The king didn't even look at it. He already knew what it would say. "Your Majesty," the aide whispered, "perhaps we should prepare a statement." Charles shook his head. Not yet. Not while there's still a chance. But hope was fading. The doctors had done everything they could. The condition had advanced faster than anticipated, attacking the body in ways they hadn't expected. Treatment options were limited. Time was shorter than they had ever imagined. Even in crisis, the royal machine continued to function. Orders were given quietly. Catherine's parents were discreetly brought to Windsor. Prince George and Princess Charlotte were escorted out of school under the guise of a family trip. They didn't know their father might not be coming home. Inside the palace, time felt warped, each minute stretching endlessly. Even the walls seemed to hum with anxiety. The palace had seen death before, but this was different. This wasn't a monarch nearing the end of a long life. This was the man meant to inherit the future. In another part of London, Prince Harry woke to a string of missed calls. His phone buzzed again, a private number from the palace. When he answered, the voice on the other end was firm but broken. "Harry, it's about your brother. You need to come home." The last time those words had been spoken to him, it was the night his mother died. He froze. Then, without hesitation, he booked the next flight. Meanwhile, the palace communications team gathered in a tense, windowless room. A single statement was drafted, revised, and locked in a safe. It would only be released on the king's order. The document was titled simply, Operation White Rose. If that statement went out, the world would know what the family had been hiding for months. As morning turned to afternoon, reporters began to grow restless. The palace gates were swarmed. People chanted William's name, holding banners reading, "Get well soon, future king." They had no idea the man they prayed for was unconscious less than a mile away. Inside the royal chapel, a priest was called to stand by. No one said why, but everyone knew. Hours passed. The doctors emerged briefly to speak with Catherine and the king. Their faces told the story. Catherine's knees gave way, and Charles caught her before she hit the ground. "Please," she whispered, "do something." "We're doing everything we can," the physician said softly. "But you must prepare yourself." Those words cut deeper than any blade. By evening, the palace was completely sealed off. The gates were closed to the public. Guards stood with grim faces. Even the ravens circling the ground seemed quieter, as if the world itself knew something sacred was slipping away. Inside, the sound of medical equipment echoed through the halls. Each beep from the monitor was a reminder that time was running out. And then silence. For a few terrifying seconds, the room froze. Catherine screamed. The doctors rushed in. And just when it seemed all was lost, the faint sound of a heartbeat returned. Weak, fragile, but there. Catherine collapsed against his chest, sobbing in relief. William was still alive, but the doctors warned her this was only temporary. The decline was irreversible. They could manage the symptoms, but they couldn't change the outcome. Outside the window, the sky began to darken. Rain fell softly against the glass. Somewhere in the distance, Big Ben struck 6. That's when the first leak happened. A journalist for the Daily Mirror received an anonymous message. "Something serious is happening at Windsor. It's about William. Prepare for the worst." Within minutes, rumors exploded online. Prince William in critical condition. Emergency at the palace. King Charles cancels all engagements. The palace tried to deny it, but the truth was already spreading faster than they could contain it. As the world speculated, one thing was certain: the royal family was united in grief. Even those estranged by years of distance and resentment were now bound by the same fear. And somewhere in that silence, the king made a decision that would change the monarchy forever. He turned to his aide and whispered, "Prepare the file." "What file, Your Majesty?" "The one that explains what happens if my son doesn't make it." No one spoke after that. For the first time in over 70 years, the palace was preparing for a future without its future king. But just as the paperwork was being drawn up, as phones buzzed and the media prepared breaking banners, something unexpected occurred, something no one in that room could have foreseen. William opened his eyes, and the first thing he said left everyone speechless. Because those words weren't about his health. They weren't about his family. He opened his eyes to a room full of ghosts. The faces staring back at him. Catherine's tear-streaked cheeks, the king's trembling hands, the doctor's grim expression, all blurred together in a haze of confusion. For a moment, William didn't understand where he was. Then the cold press of the oxygen mask and the sterile scent of antiseptic brought it all rushing back. "Where's George?" he whispered, his voice cracked and dry. Catherine leaned forward, brushing her thumb gently against his face. "He's at home, love. He's safe. Everyone's safe." William's gaze drifted toward the ceiling. He tried to sit up, but his body didn't respond the way it used to. There was weakness where there had once been strength, fragility where there had always been control. The doctor approached quietly, clipboard in hand, and exchanged a silent look with the king. That look alone told them everything. Something irreversible had begun. What exactly was wrong with the future king? That was the question on every reporter's tongue, every citizen's mind, and every insider's whisper. But the truth, the real truth, was something few could handle. The diagnosis had come weeks earlier. Hidden behind a wall of secrecy, medical files sealed under the highest classification. Only 4 people had seen them: William, Catherine, the king, and his personal physician, Dr. Edward Latham. It began with fatigue, then faint spells, then sudden collapses. Tests followed, dozens of them. And finally, the verdict: a rare and aggressive neurological disorder. Progressive, untreatable. The kind of condition that steals you slowly, your balance, your speech, your memory, until even your identity begins to fade. The press would never know that name. Not yet. The palace referred to it only as a degenerative condition, a phrase that meant everything and nothing at the same time. Catherine had begged William to rest, to step back from royal duties. But he refused. "If I stop now," he'd told her, "they'll see it as weakness. And once they sense weakness in a future king, they never forget it." Duty. It had always been his armor. But now it was his poison. For months, he pushed through. He smiled at charity events, laughed at school openings, shook hands with dignitaries, all while his body betrayed him in private. Every night, Catherine helped him up the stairs, steadying his trembling hands as he changed clothes. She could feel the decline even when he tried to hide it. The tremors, the slurred words, the way he'd stare blankly for a few seconds longer than usual before responding. He was slipping away, and no crown, no power, no prayer could stop it. The diagnosis came with one brutal truth. He might not live to see his father's coronation anniversary. The king had tried to hide his despair, but Charles wasn't made for that kind of secrecy. His grief showed in the lines around his eyes, the hesitation in his speeches. "We all must cherish the time we have," he'd said at a recent public event, his voice faltering. Few understood what he meant. William did. Late at night, he began recording messages, private, personal notes for his children. One for George, about leadership and kindness. One for Charlotte, about grace and courage. One for Louis, about mischief and laughter. He kept them hidden in a wooden box beneath his study desk, next to a letter addressed to Catherine, "For when I can't tell you myself." But the palace couldn't keep the illusion forever. His absences grew too frequent, his health too visible. When the press began to question the increasing secrecy, the communications team crafted the official story: His Royal Highness is managing a private medical condition. It worked for a while, but then came the footage. A short, shaky clip leaked from a charity event in Birmingham. William stumbled mid-speech, his hand gripping the podium as his words slurred for a moment too long. Catherine rushed to steady him. The crowd thought it was a dizzy spell, but the video went viral within hours. "Is Prince William sick?" trended again, this time worldwide. The palace scrambled to control the narrative. They released older photos, brighter videos, all meant to project health and stability. But those inside the royal walls knew the truth. He was deteriorating faster than expected. And then, something strange happened. William began having vivid dreams. Memories he couldn't place, voices he didn't recognize. Sometimes, he'd wake up convinced he'd spoken to his mother, Princess Diana. He described seeing her face, hearing her say things that felt like warnings. "William," she said in one of those dreams, "you can't protect everyone, but you can leave them the truth." That line haunted him, because William had been keeping a truth from the world, something connected to his illness, something he hadn't even told Catherine in full. It wasn't just a medical condition. It was something deeper, something that had started years ago, long before the symptoms appeared. It began after a royal tour in Africa, a routine visit that included exposure to environmental toxins near an old mining site. The local authorities had assured the royals that the area was safe. But months later, several staff members fell mysteriously ill. One passed away from complications eerily similar to William's current condition. The palace buried that story. Quietly. Permanently. William never forgot it. Now, lying in that hospital bed, he realized the truth could no longer stay hidden. His illness wasn't just tragedy, it was consequence. The king knew. So did the government. But the official stance was silence. No one wanted another royal scandal, not after decades of public skepticism and waning faith in the crown. Catherine, unaware of the full scope, pleaded with him to fight. "You can't give up," she said. "You're the future. You're the reason people still believe in this family." But William only smiled faintly. "Maybe they need to know what really keeps this family standing," he said. "And what it costs." He asked to see a notepad. His hands shook as he wrote a few sentences, short, deliberate lines. When he was done, he folded the page carefully and slipped it into an envelope. The envelope would later be found in his desk, marked in his handwriting. "To be opened only if I can't finish what I've started." By evening, the doctors informed Catherine the condition had progressed again. More treatment would only delay the inevitable. That night, Catherine couldn't sleep. She sat in the dim hospital corridor, listening to the faint hum of machines. Through the open doorway, she could see him, motionless, pale, but peaceful. Then she saw something she hadn't noticed before. A folder lying beside his bedside table, partially tucked under a book. She pulled it out and froze. It wasn't medical paperwork. It was correspondence, letters exchanged between palace officials and an anonymous research foundation in Switzerland. The letters mentioned classified test exposure, neurological anomalies, and liability assessments. She read the same phrase several times before it sank in. The incident must remain undisclosed for national stability. Her hands shook. Was this connected to William's illness? Was this what he'd been hiding? The moment she looked up, she saw the king standing in the doorway. Their eyes met. He knew she'd seen it. "Kate," he said quietly, "this must never leave this room." "But he deserves to know," she replied, voice trembling. "He does know," the king said. "That's why he's been preparing." Those words hit her harder than any diagnosis could. Preparing. For death. For revelation. For the unraveling of everything they'd built. Outside, the crowds continued to grow. Candlelight vigils appeared across London. The press speculated about brain tumors, infections, autoimmune disease, but no one came close to the truth. And through it all, the royal family maintained silence. Until the next morning, when William made a request that sent shockwaves through the entire palace. He wanted to make a public statement. Catherine begged him not to. "You're too weak," she cried. "Please, not now." But William's mind was made up. They deserve honesty. All of them. If I'm going to fade, let me do it telling the truth. He sat up, eyes glassy but determined. The press team gathered in confusion, unsure if the king would allow it. But Charles, weary and broken, gave a slow nod. A camera was set up in the hospital suite. The royal seal was placed in the background. Lights dimmed to a soft gold. Then, with trembling hands, Prince William faced the lens. He didn't read from a teleprompter. He didn't use prepared notes. He simply spoke. "My family has always stood for service," he began, voice soft but steady. "But service is meaningless without truth. For months, I have been facing a private battle, one that now must become public. I am ill. My condition is serious, and though my doctors are doing everything possible, I know what lies ahead." Catherine's tears fell silently as she stood behind the camera. He paused, looking down for a moment before continuing. This illness didn't appear by chance. It came from choices, decisions made in silence, by people who believed reputation was more important than life. I was one of them. The room froze. Even the king's breath caught in his throat. William went on. "If there's one thing I've learned, it's that the truth doesn't destroy you, it sets you free. And when you see me again, I hope you'll see not a prince, but a man who finally learned that lesson." The broadcast ended after only 5 minutes. But the damage and the shock were instant. News outlets scrambled to analyze every word. What did he mean by choices made in silence? Who were the people he referred to? The palace immediately issued a clarification, calling the statement personal reflections. But the world had already decided. It sounded like a confession. For the first time in centuries, the royal family was being accused of covering up something that had endangered one of their own. As night fell, Catherine returned to his bedside. He was asleep again, his breathing shallow. She kissed his forehead and whispered, "You did it, Will. You told them." But when she looked back at the folder, the one marked classified exposure, a terrifying thought crossed her mind. If William's illness wasn't natural, who was responsible? And as that question formed, another realization hit her even harder. Someone inside the palace had been trying to make sure the truth never came out. Because in the following days, evidence would begin to disappear. Files would be shredded, hard drives wiped clean, and Catherine would discover that her husband's illness wasn't the only secret buried beneath the crown. The one she was about to uncover would put her life and the future of the monarchy in danger. It was nearly midnight when Catherine finally broke. For weeks, she had carried the weight of every whispered lie, every half-truth hidden behind royal smiles. But that night, when the palace halls fell silent and the only sound was the rhythmic hum of the oxygen machine beside William's bed, the mask shattered. She couldn't hold it anymore. She stood by the window, watching rain smear against the glass, the London skyline blurred by tears she refused to wipe away. Behind her, William lay still, too still. The glow of the monitors painted his face in a pale, sickly light. The man who once made the world believe in the fairy tale of modern royalty now looked fragile, almost boyish, like the child who once walked behind his mother's coffin. She turned to him, whispering softly, "You promised me forever, Will." But promises mean nothing when fate has already chosen the ending. The diagnosis had become more than a medical truth. It was a ticking clock. Every movement, every breath, every small tremor reminded her that time was slipping away, and fast. But worse than that was the other truth, the one William had hinted at, the one hidden inside those classified letters from the palace archive. Catherine couldn't unsee them. The signatures, the royal seals, the words confidential liability. It wasn't just an illness. It was a secret buried beneath decades of silence. A royal mistake that had now turned into a royal curse. For the first time since her marriage into the monarchy, Catherine wasn't just scared, she was angry. Angry that she had been kept in the dark. Angry that her husband, the father of her children, had been made a victim of the very institution he served. Angry that truth, once again, had been sacrificed to preserve an image. She pressed her palms against the window pane, trying to steady her breath. And then, the dam broke. She cried, loudly, uncontrollably, violently. The sound echoed through the private quarters, bouncing off marble and wood, raw enough to rattle even the guards stationed outside. She wasn't crying as a princess or a duchess. She was crying as a woman losing her husband, a mother terrified of telling her children that their father might not see their next birthday. At that moment, the door creaked open. A soft voice called from behind. "Ma'am." It was Lady Anstruther, her personal aide. She stepped forward cautiously, holding a tray with tea that neither of them would touch. Her eyes, red from crying, avoided Catherine's for a second before she said quietly, "The king wants to see you." Now, Catherine nodded, wiped her face, and followed. The king was waiting in his private study, the same room where generations of monarchs had signed declarations, treaties, and death warrants. Now, it smelled faintly of paper and grief. Charles was seated by the fire, a letter in his hand. He looked older than she had ever seen him, his shoulders slumped, his face drawn, eyes glassy and distant. "Sit down, Catherine," he said softly. She did. He held up the letter. "This arrived from the Prime Minister's office. They're aware of the situation. They're offering state assistance for medical transport, if it becomes necessary." The phrasing hit her like a slap. "If it becomes necessary." "What does that mean?" she asked. Charles exhaled slowly. "It means they're preparing for the worst." She stared at him, disbelief twisting her features. "He's not gone, sir. He's still fighting. He'll recover." The king's expression didn't change. "I've seen this before, my dear. Hope can be cruel." Something inside her snapped. "Hope is all I have left," she said through gritted teeth. "You want to talk about cruelty? Try watching your husband wither away while the people who could have helped him earlier chose to protect themselves instead." The king's gaze dropped. He didn't argue. That silence told her everything. "You knew," she whispered. "You knew what caused this." Charles closed his eyes, hands tightening around the letter. "There are things you don't understand, Catherine. Decisions made long before your time. You must trust that some truths do more harm than good." She stood, voice rising. You mean truths that harm the monarchy, not the people in it. He looked up sharply. The air between them crackled with tension. You think I wanted this, he said, his voice trembling. You think I wanted to bury my son under layers of protocol and secrecy? I did what was necessary to protect this family, because that's what the crown demands. Always has. Then maybe the crown is the problem, she shot back. For a long time, neither spoke. The fire crackled. Outside, thunder rolled across the sky. Finally, Charles whispered, if he dies, the monarchy dies with him. The words hung there, heavy and final. That night, Catherine returned to William's room. He was awake, but barely. His lips moved faintly, whispering her name. She sat beside him, brushing his hair back, trying to smile. Don't look at me like that, he murmured. Like what? Like I'm leaving you. She swallowed hard. Then don't. He smiled faintly. If I could stay forever, I would. They sat in silence for a while, her head resting on his shoulder, the machine softly humming like an orchestra of inevitability. Then his hand twitched, reaching weakly toward the bedside drawer. There's something I need you to see, he said. She opened it. Inside was a sealed envelope, identical to the one she'd seen before. Her name was written across it in his handwriting. For you, he whispered. When I'm gone. She tried to protest, but he shook his head. Not yet, but soon. Tears burned in her eyes. I don't want your letters, Will. I want you. He didn't answer. His eyes closed again, exhausted. Catherine sat there long after he drifted into sleep. She couldn't bring herself to open the letter, but something inside her whispered that the answers she sought were hidden within those pages. Hours later, when the room grew quiet and the palace lights dimmed, she slipped away with the envelope in her hand. She didn't go to bed. She went to the royal archives. The archives were guarded, ancient, and labyrinthine, filled with centuries of history that the public would never see. She moved quietly, her breath shallow, her heart pounding. She found the key in the drawer of William's study, just where he'd left it months ago. The folder she needed was marked Operation Marigold. She'd seen the name before, scribbled in one of the confidential letters connected to William's illness. Inside were reports, dated, redacted, chilling. It confirmed everything. The classified exposure during William's royal tour wasn't an accident. The palace had been warned about potential contamination in the area. The Ministry of Defense had flagged the site as hazardous. But the trip went on, because canceling it would have looked politically weak. William had been unknowingly exposed to neurotoxic substances, the same ones now destroying his body. The palace had silenced the scientists who discovered the link, paid them off, sealed the records, and Charles, her father-in-law, had signed off on it. Her knees buckled. The folder slipped from her hands, papers scattering across the floor. For a moment, she couldn't breathe. She looked around the dimly lit room, surrounded by portraits of dead kings and queens, and whispered, "You killed him." The sound of her own voice startled her. It was the first time she had ever spoken the thought aloud. She gathered the papers, shoving them back into the folder, and clutched it to her chest. When she looked up, she saw movement in the reflection of the glass door. Someone was watching her. A shadow stepped forward. It was Lord Haversham, the king's private secretary. His face was expressionless, his tone cold. "You shouldn't be here, Your Royal Highness," he said quietly. "There are things in this room that even you cannot unsee." Catherine's pulse quickened. "You knew about this," she said. "You let it happen." He took a step closer. "You must understand, this is bigger than one man. Even if that man is your husband, stability must be preserved. The crown must endure." Her voice hardened. "At what cost?" Haversham didn't answer. He simply reached out his hand. "Give me the folder, ma'am. You don't want to make this mistake." She stared at him, defiant. "If I give you this, he dies for nothing. You'll destroy everything he stood for." She took a step back, clutching the folder tighter. "Then maybe everything he stood for needs to be destroyed." Before he could reply, she turned and ran. Out of the archives, down the narrow corridor, her footsteps echoing through the empty halls. Behind her, Haversham's voice called out, low and sharp, "You can't run from the crown, Catherine. The crown always catches up." She didn't stop. She didn't sleep. When she finally reached her room, she collapsed beside William, folder still clutched against her chest. He stirred slightly, his hand brushing hers. "You found it," he whispered weakly. Her breath caught. "You knew?" He nodded faintly. "I had to. But now you do too. And you have to promise me something. Her voice shook. Anything. Don't let them bury the truth. He closed his eyes again, and the machines hummed on. Catherine sat in silence, heart pounding, tears streaming down her face. She looked at the folder in her hands and whispered, "I won't." But what she didn't know was that the truth she had just uncovered was only the beginning. Because in less than 24 hours, the entire world would find out something far worse. Something that would make even the crown tremble. The letter was waiting for her at dawn. It sat on the small mahogany table beside William's bed, the royal crest faintly catching the morning light filtering through the curtains. Catherine hadn't seen it before. How could she have missed it? But now it was there, sealed in wax, with her name written in his steady handwriting. For Catherine's eyes only. Those words sent a chill through her. She hesitated for a moment, looking at him. He was still asleep, his breathing shallow but steady, the soft rise and fall of his chest the only sign that he was still here, still holding on. His skin looked pale against the white sheets, his hand limp in hers. Catherine brushed a tear from her cheek and broke the seal. Inside was a folded piece of thick stationery, the ink slightly smudged in places, as though written through tears or trembling hands. She recognized the careful script immediately. William had always written with the precision of a man who knew that someday every word he left behind might be studied by historians. But this wasn't meant for history. This was meant for her. She began to read. "My darling Catherine, if you are reading this, it means I've run out of time to explain the truth to you myself. There are things I've carried for years, burdens I couldn't share, not because I didn't trust you, but because I wanted to protect you from what the crown really is." Catherine paused, her heart hammering. The illness, the letter continued, was not fate. It was consequence. A choice made years ago, on a day I was told to smile for the cameras and shake hands with men who lied to my face. I was sent into danger so that Britain could save face. They told me the reports were exaggerated, that there was no real threat. But they knew. My father knew. They all knew. And when the symptoms began, I was told to stay silent. For stability, for the image of the monarchy, for the country. Her hand trembled as she turned the page. I stayed silent because I believed in duty. Because I thought that if I did what was right for the people, somehow it would all make sense. But as I've grown weaker, I've realized something much darker. The crown isn't made of gold, it's made of secrets. And every generation pays for them in blood. Her breath hitched. "I need you to find the truth, Kate. Find the people who signed those documents. Don't let them bury what happened. If you do, it will happen again. To someone else, to our children, to anyone who dares to stand in this family's way." Catherine covered her mouth, a sob escaping. There were names listed at the bottom of the letter, officials, advisors, even members of parliament. People she had seen at dinners, smiled at, shaken hands with. She read them twice, unable to believe it. William's words grew faint toward the end, the ink lighter. "If I'm gone before you finish reading this, promise me you'll do what I couldn't. Promise me you'll tell the truth, no matter the cost. Even if it means destroying everything we built." He had signed it simply, "Forever yours, W." Catherine pressed the letter to her chest and wept. Minutes passed before she realized she wasn't alone. A shadow lingered near the doorway. "Ma'am." It was the nurse, her voice trembling. "The king wishes to see you immediately." Catherine folded the letter carefully, slipping it into the pocket of her robe. She gave one last look at William before she followed the nurse through the dim corridor toward the king's study. Charles was pacing when she entered, still in his dressing gown. The television was on mute, showing endless news footage of Windsor gates surrounded by reporters and mourners. He turned sharply when he saw her. "You've been reading his things." It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. Catherine froze. "I found a letter. He wanted me to." "To do what, exactly?" the king interrupted. "To undermine the institution? To drag this family into ruin over an illness." "It's not an illness," she said, her voice cracking. "It's a crime." Charles's jaw tightened. "You think I don't know that? You think I haven't lived with that knowledge every day? There are things, Catherine, things you cannot begin to imagine, that were decided long before either of us had a choice." "So you knew," she said, "and you did nothing." "I did what I was told to do," he said quietly. "I protected the crown. That's what we all do." Her eyes filled with disbelief. "You protected the crown and sacrificed your son." His silence was the only answer she needed. Catherine turned to leave, but Charles's voice stopped her at the door. Be careful what you do next. Once you start pulling at this thread, the whole fabric unravels. She didn't look back. When she returned to William's bedside, his eyes were open. He had been awake the whole time. What did he say? He asked, his voice barely audible. Catherine sat down beside him, holding his hand tightly. He told me to stop asking questions. A faint smile touched William's lips. Then you know you're getting close. She nodded. You knew they'd try to silence you. They already have, he whispered. They control everything. The press, the records, even the doctors. Catherine's pulse quickened. Then we'll take it outside of their control. I'll tell the truth myself. He shook his head weakly. No, you can't. Not yet. You'll end up just like me. She leaned closer. Then tell me what I'm supposed to do, William. Tell me how to fix this. He looked toward the window, the faint morning light glinting in his tired eyes. There's something I left behind. Not in the palace. Somewhere safer. Somewhere only I could go without being followed. Where? She whispered. He looked back at her, his voice faint but deliberate. St. George's Chapel. The name hit her like a jolt. St. George's, where they had been married, where generations of royals had been buried, where secrets had always been laid to rest. You'll find it beneath the altar, he said. But be careful who you trust. They're watching. Catherine felt the weight of the moment sink in. This wasn't just about an illness anymore. It was about truth and danger. That night, she waited until the palace fell silent. Then, dressed in plain clothes and a dark coat, she slipped through the back entrance, the letter hidden inside her pocket. The chapel stood in eerie stillness, bathed in moonlight. The heavy doors creaked open as she entered, the air cold and still. Her footsteps echoed across the stone floor as she walked toward the altar. She stopped at the front pew, where she and William had once knelt together, years ago. The memory hit her like a wave, the laughter, the vows, the promise of forever. And now, beneath that very altar, she was about to uncover the one thing that could destroy them all. She knelt, feeling along the carved base until her fingers brushed something uneven, a small indentation. A hidden latch. Her heart pounded as she lifted it. Inside was a small wooden box. She pulled it free, her hands shaking. It was locked with an ornate brass clasp. Then she saw it, taped to the underside of the box. A note, written in William's handwriting. If you found this, it means the truth can't stay buried any longer. Catherine's breath caught. But before she could open it, she heard footsteps echoing behind her. Slow, deliberate, approaching. She turned, her pulse racing. A figure emerged from the shadows at the back of the chapel. Tall, composed, familiar. It was Lord Haversham. He stepped forward, his voice calm but menacing. You shouldn't be here, Your Royal Highness. This place is for prayers, not treason. Catherine clutched the box to her chest. You knew, didn't you? You all did. You let him suffer for your secrets. He smiled faintly, almost pitying. He was never supposed to find out. Neither were you. But now that you have, I'm afraid there's only one way to protect the crown. Her breath hitched. You wouldn't dare. He took another step closer. You underestimate how far the monarchy will go to survive. Her grip tightened around the box. Then you'll have to kill me to stop me. Haversham's smile faded. Don't tempt me. For a long, tense moment, neither moved. Then, in the distance, the faint sound of approaching footsteps broke the silence, security guards responding to the noise. Haversham's expression shifted. He leaned closer, whispering, You've started something you can't control, Catherine. Once this gets out, you won't just destroy the crown, you'll destroy your family. He turned and vanished into the shadows just as the guards arrived. Your Royal Highness, are you all right? One of them asked. Catherine nodded shakily. Yes, just praying. They escorted her back to her quarters. She didn't sleep. She sat in the dim light, staring at the box, the letter still in her hand. And when she finally opened the brass clasp, she found something inside that made her blood run cold. A flash drive, one that contained video files, recordings marked with dates and locations that matched William's royal tours. And one of them, labeled simply Africa, restricted, was timestamped just days before the exposure that started it all. As she pressed play, the first image appeared, William shaking hands with government officials, smiling for the cameras. Then the screen flickered. The next frame showed something she wasn't supposed to see, men in protective suits, carrying equipment marked hazardous material. And standing just behind them, partially visible, was a man she recognized. Lord Haversham. Her breath caught in her throat. The man who had threatened her in the chapel wasn't just protecting the crown. He had orchestrated the lie from the very beginning. And now, she had proof. But what she didn't know yet was that getting the truth out would come with a price. And the next 48 hours would push her to the edge of everything she thought she knew about loyalty, power, and love. The next morning, the chapel doors were locked. The guards claimed it was for renovation, but everyone in Windsor Castle knew that was a lie. Something had happened inside St. George's Chapel, something they couldn't explain, something they were trying to hide. Catherine hadn't slept. The flash drive she found under the altar had changed everything. The footage still looped in her mind. William smiling for the cameras, unaware that just meters away, government officials and palace aides were handling hazardous materials under the guise of a charity project. And among them, the unmistakable profile of Lord Haversham, the king's most trusted advisor. The man who had lied to everyone. The man who had threatened her. The man who had, in all likelihood, condemned her husband to death. As the morning light crept through the curtains, Catherine sat beside William's bed, the wooden box on her lap, the flash drive still in her hand. Her pulse raced as she considered what to do next. Should she go to the press? Should she confront the king? Should she tell the world? But she couldn't. Not yet. The monarchy was a fortress built on control. If she moved too fast, they'd silence her before the truth ever reached daylight. She looked at William, frail but breathing, his skin almost translucent in the light. The man who had once seemed untouchable now looked heartbreakingly human. His lips moved faintly. "Kate." She leaned closer. "I'm here." His voice was barely a whisper. "Did you find it?" "Yes," she said, tears brimming. "I found everything. You were right. It's all connected." They knew. They let it happen. His eyes opened slightly, blue but distant. "Then there's one more thing you have to do." "What is it?" He swallowed, his throat dry. "Go back to the chapel tonight. The priest, Father Bennett, he knows the rest. He has my confession." Her heart skipped. "Your confession?" He nodded weakly. "I made him record it months ago. I knew this day would come." "Why didn't you tell me?" she asked. "Because you would have tried to stop me," he said faintly. "And I couldn't let you carry that burden." She gripped his hand tighter. "You're not doing this alone anymore." He looked at her for a long moment, his lips curling into the faintest smile. "I know." That night, when the castle grew quiet, Catherine slipped through the corridors again. Every step was heavier, every sound louder. The weight of what she was doing, the risk she was taking, pressed against her chest like armor. Outside, the air was cold and still. The path to the chapel was lined with statues of saints and monarchs, their stony faces illuminated by the moonlight. As she approached the grand doors, she noticed something strange. They were already open. Her breath caught. Inside, the chapel was dimly lit by flickering candles. The scent of incense hung in the air. And at the far end, kneeling near the altar, was Father Bennett. He turned as she entered, his expression calm but weary. "Your Royal Highness," he said softly. "I knew you would come." Catherine hesitated. "You knew?" He nodded. "He told me you would find your way here when it was time." She stepped closer, clutching the flash drive. "He said you have something, a recording?" Father Bennett gestured toward the small wooden confessional booth. "It's inside. He made me promise to keep it safe until you came for it." She walked toward it slowly. The booth looked ancient, its dark wood polished by centuries of hands, its carvings worn by whispered sins. She pulled back the curtain. Inside, resting on the narrow bench, was a small voice recorder. She pressed play. At first, there was static. Then a familiar voice, weak but steady. William's voice. "My name is William Arthur Philip Lewis. This is my sworn statement, recorded on the 3rd of March, under the witness of Father Bennett. What I'm about to say must be preserved, even if it destroys everything I was born to protect." Catherine's breath caught as she sank to her knees. "I was sent on assignment to Africa as part of an environmental outreach initiative. We were told the area was secure, but it wasn't. I saw men in protective suits, equipment labeled biohazard. I questioned the officials, but they dismissed it as routine safety protocol. Days later, I began feeling dizzy, weak. I thought it was exhaustion, but when I returned home, the symptoms worsened." There was a pause. Then his voice lowered. When I asked for medical testing, the palace physician told me to stop asking questions. He said there were documents I wasn't authorized to see. A week later, I was summoned to my father's office. He told me, quietly, painfully, that there had been an oversight. The contamination levels were higher than expected. The local contractors had failed to follow protocol. But he made me promise never to speak of it again. Catherine pressed her hand to her mouth. He said the truth could cause a diplomatic scandal. William continued. That if I spoke publicly, it could endanger the monarchy and destabilize relations with foreign allies. So I stayed silent. I smiled for cameras. I told the world I was fine. But I wasn't. And now, I'm dying because of it. There was another pause. Then his tone softened. If anyone finds this recording, know this. I don't blame my father. He's as much a prisoner of the crown as I am. But the people deserve the truth. The monarchy cannot survive on lies any longer. The future must be built on honesty, even if it means tearing down what came before. Static. Then silence. Catherine sat there, motionless, tears spilling freely down her cheeks. Father Bennett stepped forward, placing a gentle hand on her shoulder. He wanted you to hear it with your own ears, he said quietly. He wanted you to understand why he made the choices he did. She looked up at him, eyes wide with anguish. He knew he was dying. He knew they would never let this get out. The priest nodded solemnly. He also knew you were strong enough to finish what he started. She clutched the recorder tightly. If I release this, they'll destroy me. They'll try, Father Bennett said. But they can't destroy the truth. She stood, resolve hardening in her eyes. Then I'll release it. The world will know. Before the priest could respond, the chapel doors burst open. Catherine spun around. A dozen royal security officers flooded in, their faces grim, their leader holding a sealed order. Your Royal Highness, the man said, voice firm. You are to come with us immediately. Under whose authority? She demanded. The king's. Father Bennett stepped forward. She has done nothing wrong. The guard cut him off. Stand down, Father. This is not your concern. Two officers moved toward her. She clutched the recorder to her chest, backing away. You can't take this from me. It's William's final words. One of them reached for it. Ma'am, please don't make this difficult. Don't touch me, she snapped. The chapel echoed with her voice. The tension was unbearable. Then, as the guards advanced, Father Bennett raised his hand. Enough, he shouted. You dare desecrate this place with your threats? You dare silence truth in the house of God. The guards hesitated, glancing uneasily at each other. Catherine seized the moment. She turned, darting toward the side exit. The guards shouted, chasing after her, but she was fast. She slipped through a narrow door leading to the crypt passageway, a centuries-old tunnel that stretched beneath the chapel toward the lower gardens. Her breath came in sharp bursts as she ran through the darkness, clutching the recorder to her chest. The tunnel was cold, damp, lined with the tombs of forgotten royals. The echoes of footsteps followed behind her. Stop! By order of the king. She didn't stop. She couldn't. William's voice still rang in her ears. The future must be built on honesty, even if it means tearing down what came before. She reached the end of the tunnel, bursting through a side gate into the moonlit gardens. Her hands were trembling, her lungs burning. She hid behind a stone statue, trying to steady her breath. The guards were still inside. For now, she was safe. She looked down at the recorder, whispering, I'll tell them, Will. I'll tell the world everything. But then, from behind her, a voice spoke. You won't have to. She spun around. Standing in the shadows was Prince Harry. He looked worn, unshaven, eyes red from lack of sleep, but determined. Harry, she breathed. How did you? I saw the reports, he said quietly. I came as soon as I heard. Tears filled her eyes. He made a recording. He told the truth. It's all here. Harry stepped closer, his face pale. Then we have to protect it. Because if they find out we have it, they'll destroy us both. Catherine nodded, gripping the recorder. Then we don't have much time. For a moment, they stood in silence beneath the cold moonlight, two people bound by loss, betrayal, and one impossible choice. And as the chapel bells began to toll midnight, Catherine realized something. William's confession was only part of the truth. The real question wasn't who had poisoned him. It was why. And the answer to that question would shake the crown more violently than anything that had come before. Because the next morning, Buckingham Palace would issue a statement that changed everything, and it wouldn't be Catherine or Harry who spoke first. The long mahogany table in the Windsor dining hall, normally a place for royal banquets and laughter echoing across centuries, was now set for a family preparing for heartbreak. The chandeliers shimmered above polished silver, but their light felt hollow, too bright for such a somber evening. The staff had been dismissed early, the curtains drawn tight. This wasn't a royal occasion. It was a goodbye. Prince William's chair had been moved closer to the head of the table, not out of formality, but because he no longer had the strength to walk the full length of the room. Catherine sat beside him, her hand wrapped around his, her face composed but pale. Across from them sat King Charles, his expression unreadable, equal parts grief, guilt, and duty. Princess Anne was there too, her jaw tight, hiding emotion behind discipline. Camilla sipped from her glass, but didn't touch her food. Prince Edward and Sophie sat in silence, eyes darting between William and the king. And at the far end of the table, almost as if he didn't belong, sat Harry. It had been years since they had all shared a meal together. The silence was unbearable. The only sound was the soft ticking of the antique clock that had marked royal dinners for generations. William cleared his throat. His voice was weak, but steady. "Thank you for coming." Anne was the first to respond. "You don't have to thank us," she said. "We're family." A faint smile touched William's lips. "Family," he repeated. "That word has been complicated for us, hasn't it?" No one answered. Harry looked down at his plate, unable to meet his brother's eyes. It was strange. He'd rehearsed what he might say 1,000 times during the flight back from California. But now, sitting here, the words evaporated. The last time he'd seen William like this, he was vibrant, alive, laughing with the children in the garden. The difference was unbearable. Finally, Catherine broke the silence. "William wanted us all together tonight." Charles straightened. "Why?" "Because," William said softly, "this might be the last time we all are." The air left the room. Camilla set her glass down slowly, her hand trembling slightly, and looked away, blinking hard. Harry's chest tightened. "Don't talk like that." William smiled faintly. "I don't mean it dramatically. I just mean, life doesn't give you many chances to say what matters before it's too late." Charles's voice cracked as he said, "You're not going anywhere." William's gaze met his father's. "You know that's not true." The king's jaw clenched. "I won't accept it. We've survived too much already. We'll find something, another treatment, another trial, something." William shook his head gently. "You can't fix this, father. None of us can." For a long time, no one spoke. The tension hung like smoke. Then, suddenly, Harry pushed his chair back. "You think I came here to watch you give up? You think I flew across the world just to sit here while everyone talks about you like you're already gone?" Catherine placed a hand on his arm. "Harry." He pulled away, eyes glistening. "No. He's my brother. My whole life. I've looked up to him, envied him, fought with him, hated him, loved him, and now I'm supposed to just sit here and watch him die." William's lips quivered into a smile. "You've always been dramatic." That earned a small, nervous laugh from Anne, the kind that cracks under the weight of emotion. Harry took a step closer to him, his anger dissolving into grief. "I should have been here sooner," he whispered. "I should have answered your calls. I should have." William raised a trembling hand. "Don't," he said softly. "We both said things we regret. But none of it matters now. What matters is that you're here." Harry's voice broke. "I thought we had time." William's eyes grew distant. "Time," he murmured, "isn't something we ever really own, is it? We just borrow it from tomorrow." Silence followed again, heavier this time, deeper. Catherine wiped a tear from her cheek, trying to steady her voice. "He wanted to say something to each of you." William nodded, his breathing shallow. "I don't know how long I have, so I want to say this while I still can." He turned first to Anne. "You were always the strong one, Aunt. You never wavered. Promise me you'll look after the children. Teach them what real duty looks like, without losing who they are." And swallowed hard, her voice barely above a whisper. "I promise." He turned to Edward and Sophie. "Keep the family grounded. Remind everyone that titles mean nothing without compassion." Sophie nodded, tears slipping silently down her face. Then his gaze shifted to Camilla. For a long moment, he said nothing. The tension between them had always been delicate, unspoken but understood. Finally, he said quietly, "Take care of my father. He needs more love than he lets the world see. Camilla looked down, unable to meet his eyes. I will, she whispered. Then William looked at Charles. The king's eyes were already wet, his composure cracking. Father, William said softly, I forgive you. Charles shook his head. You have nothing to forgive. Yes, I do, William replied. We both do. But that's what love is, isn't it? Forgiving even when you don't have to. Charles's voice broke completely. You've always been a better man than I deserved. William reached out his hand. The king took it, gripping it tightly. For the first time in decades, the monarchy didn't feel like a dynasty. It felt like a family. Broken, flawed, human. After a moment, William looked toward Harry. And you? He said with a faint smile, stop running. Harry frowned. What do you mean? From yourself. From the family. From everything. You think distance keeps you safe, but it only makes the silence louder. Harry looked down, ashamed. I was angry too, William continued. But anger doesn't heal anything. It just makes the hole deeper. Promise me you'll come home sometimes. Not for duty. For them. He nodded toward Catherine and the children. Harry's voice cracked. I promise. William smiled faintly. Then I can rest. The room went silent again. No one ate. No one could. After a while, Catherine rose quietly and left the room. The others followed, one by one, until only William and Charles remained. The king sat back in his chair, staring at the half-empty glass in front of him. William broke the silence. You're going to have to decide soon. Charles looked up, confused. Decide what? What to tell the world, William said softly. Because the truth won't stay buried much longer. The king's eyes hardened. You've spoken enough of truth tonight. William met his gaze. I've spoken of peace. But peace doesn't come from silence. Charles's hand trembled slightly. If you expose what happened, it could destroy everything we've worked for. Maybe it needs to be destroyed, William said. The king's voice rose. You sound just like your mother. William smiled faintly. That's the nicest thing you've ever said to me. Charles stared at him, chest heaving, torn between fury and heartbreak. William leaned back, his eyes softening. You can't protect both the crown and your children, father. One will always fall. The king said nothing. Moments later, Catherine returned, holding George's small hand. Charlotte followed, carrying a folded drawing of their family. Louis trailed behind, clutching his stuffed bear. They approached quietly. George climbed onto William's lap, nestling against his chest. Charlotte placed the drawing on the table. It showed the five of them standing under a bright sun, smiling. She'd drawn William with a crown, but with a heart above it. It's us, she said proudly. I made it for you. William's lips trembled. It's beautiful. Are you coming home soon? She asked.